Hey people, welcome to the channel, and in this case talking about arguably the most famous fighting knife ever, the Fairbairn-Sykes fighting dagger. Even among people that are not knife enthusiasts, they may not know the name, the history behind it, but the shape is most likely something they've quickly will admit they've seen before here and there. It's found in numerous patches from special forces around the world from different countries, and there's a good reason why this has been so I don't know if it's been so successful, definitely very famous. Now, keeping it real, this is not something tremendously original. It is a knife that pretty much resembles every stiletto and dagger from the Middle Ages. Originally created by William Fairbairn and Eric Sykes while working in the Shanghai Municipal Police in China. These two were very much into different techniques of hand-to-hand fighting, firearms, knives. This was clearly a passion of theirs, and when they moved back to UK for training the OSS, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the spy school in which they were training their agents, this is a design they brought along with them. Now, it was quickly accepted by other organizations, and it's a knife that's been copied numerous times. Originally made by Wilkinson Sword in 1941, but many other companies ended up doing the knife, including in war period U.S. manufacturers. They did not have the same reputation. They were quite a bit more brittle, probably because of the heat treatment, and the knife itself incorporates a few design characteristics that make it quite a bit fragile. This tip will break. The extremely narrow tang will not hold on much, but in terms of penetration, man, it is very hard to argue with this knife. 7-inch blade, mostly intended for piercing, and pierce it did very well. No question about that. Now, there's a common misconception that it was not intended to be sharpened. That is not correct. The Fairbairn-Sykes dagger is supposed to be rather sharp, very sharp, because even in the manuals and the training that they had, it explained that it wasn't just about penetrating, stabbing, but also cutting away so as to compromise the most amount of arteries that you could. So yeah, very effective for that. I still wonder though, I have this question, I ask myself, how well did this thing hold on really when you had someone moving around that you just stabbed? This is tremendously thin. So I will assume that with a very soft heat treatment, it would probably resist better, maybe even bend without breaking. But man, it is something that personally, it would not be my first choice as a fighting knife. I think you have more successful models, and probably the Rex Applegate evolution of this knife, which is a lot sturdier, proves that point that I'm considering. Still, one of the most emblematic knives, definitely the most famous fighting knife that we know of, at least in my opinion, the most famous fighting knife. I mean, it does have the grip with this ribbed shape would allow for a nice amount of retention. I actually feel it's a little bit like in the reverse. Like if I look at some of the other knives that I have, and let me grab one of the Facong knives that I have, typically shaped right now. This is of course a much bigger knife, but the shape of this handle makes a lot more sense in terms of it's less likely to slip away because of being thicker on this end, right? So that's something, and of course, much longer dagger, but this is something that needed to be carried. I was just reading about the spatula-shaped sheath that it originally came in, which caused injuries for paratroopers jumping out of planes, and then it was replaced with this sort of thing, which was less likely to cut or hurt the person wearing it. But as I was saying, I feel that this shape would have been much more prone to improve retention, but at the same time, this gets tremendously thin, that tang of theirs. So maybe that's why you have a little bit more of a thicker. I mean, still, for the size, man, it is obviously a design that would very well perform in terms of stabbing and penetration and compromising those internal organs. I don't buy that much into the cutting away, especially with this kind of blade. Here I clearly see that what you're looking for is stabbing, internal bleeding, and that being well known as a much more effective way of eliminating an attacker. It's there's a number of different numbers, but about 30-40% more effective stabbing than just slashing away, right? So the stabbing, the penetrating wound is definitely what this is going for. The sheath, this more lightweight and less problematic sheath is maybe one of the more recognizable ones, and agents would carry this in a number of ways, maybe in a boot or hitting somewhere in the forearm. Anyway, a number of possible ways of carrying it. But definitely one of the most emblematic knives, one of the most emblematic fighting knives. It was, of course, competing with the K-bar in many regards. But here is where I honestly wonder. I mean, and just looking at these two, this is clearly the more utilitarian knife. This is going to be stabbing better. This is going to be cutting and slashing better. And the wound channel that you will be creating with the K-bar, man, I think it's almost twice as much. And even though it will not penetrate as nicely as this extremely narrow tip, it's going to be sturdier. And the clip point will still get, this is, by the way, an original USMC K-bar knife. One of my most prized knives in my collection. But I will most likely I would go with the K-bar over this knife, especially giving that extremely narrow tang. I mean, the rat tail tang, the K-bar isn't all that. But again, if you go for what ended up evolving into, they're going with stronger tangs. Something this thin will probably end up breaking at the worst possible moment. But man, it is a beauty. It is a beautiful dagger, and I think that's one of the reasons why so many other agencies and other countries and special operation groups from other nations ended up adopting it as well. There's a strong element of aesthetics, how nice it looks, and yes, it will stab all day long. Well, maybe not all day long because it's not going to be all that sturdy, but it's definitely going to be stabbing extremely well. And there's people that are very die-hard fans of the FS knife. In terms of stabbing someone, shanking someone, it will do very well. These days, I think it's been surpassed. Definitely as a utilitarian knife. I think that one of the main problems they face with this sort of knife is, sure, you would give this to an agent, to an OSS agent or some Marine Raider, right? But the first time a Marine Raider needs a knife for opening something, going to be breaking the tip. That's going to be the first thing that happens. Of course it is. And that's why knives such as the M3 and a number of so many knives that are basically copied over the years, and these days it would be the Glock field knife or survival knife that has that little clip point tip and 16, 17 or 18 centimeters, around a 7-inch blade that will penetrate and still be sturdy enough. A lot more of a tougher tang. But I think this will perform better when things get tough. But that's something that is left for the history books, right? The evolution of these weapons over the years. But man, I buy into it. I think it's a beautiful classic that had its place in history. And yeah, we can all learn from these sort of things. Folks, remember that if you're interested in survival and preparedness, you have the channel with a ton of information, as well as Surviving the Economic Collapse and Street Survival Skills, where I have chapters dedicated to using these tools for self-defense purposes in the complicated world that we live in today. Guys, see you next video. Take care.